Imagine that every prayer you say is analyzed by artificial intelligence. Every doubt you have about your faith is recorded. Every religious message you receive is personalized to have the maximum emotional impact on you. This is not a dystopia from a science fiction novel. It is a reality that the Vatican has been creating for the past 5 years. The world's oldest religious institution has developed an artificial intelligence system to control the minds of billions of believers. Technology capable of predicting your spiritual crises and manipulating your beliefs. Secret laboratories beneath St. Peter's Basilica. Partnerships with tech giants. Mass surveillance under the guise of pastoral care. How did the church turn into a digital empire of control? What happened when the truth came out? And can freedom of belief still be saved in the age of all-seeing algorithms? Today, we reveal one of the most shocking secrets of our time, the Digital Shepherd Project. If you were shocked by this story of how technology is penetrating the most intimate corners of the human mind, subscribe to our channel. We continue to reveal secrets that the authorities prefer to keep quiet about. Now, here's a question for discussion in the comments. If artificial intelligence could strengthen your faith, making it deeper and more meaningful, but at the same time analyze all your data and influence your decisions, would you agree to it? Where is the line between help and manipulation? Write your opinion. This is a really important question for the future, not only of religion, but of human freedom in general. In 2022, Italian journalist Marco Bellucci stumbled upon a strange trend in Vatican government procurement. The Holy See was ordering server equipment worth more than the annual budget of some European scientific institutions. We're talking about hundreds of super-powerful processors, specialized graphics accelerators, and petabyte-sized data storage systems. For a country the size of a few football fields, this seemed crazy. Bellucci started digging deeper. The procurement documents went through several front companies registered in Luxembourg and Switzerland. The final recipient was listed as the Institute for Modern Communications at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Officially, this institute was engaged in studying ways to convey religious values to modern youth through social networks. But why would that require equipment capable of processing billions of operations per second? When Bellucci tried to get a comment from Vatican representatives, his request was ignored. Moreover, a week later he was asked to leave the territory of the Holy See, where he had been accredited as a journalist for 15 years. The refusal was polite but firm. The press service stated that technical equipment issues are an internal matter for a sovereign state. This only fueled Bellucci's interest. He contacted computer experts and showed them the specifications of the equipment he had ordered. The specialists were unanimous. This configuration is typical for big data processing centers and machine learning systems. One of the consultants noted that such capacities are used by major technology corporations to train artificial intelligence models. In parallel with the purchase of servers, the Vatican was increasing its staff of specialists. Through closed recruitment channels, they searched for programmers specializing in neural networks, natural language processing, and behavioral pattern analysis. Very generous contracts were offered with one condition: complete confidentiality of work. Candidates were asked to sign non-disclosure agreements for a period of 25 years. Several former employees of technology companies actually accepted the offers and disappeared from the professional field of vision. Their social media profiles froze, with their last posts dated to the moment they moved to Rome. Colleagues lost contact with them. One of the friends of such a specialist said that the last thing he heard was, "I'm going to work on a project that will change the understanding of faith." That was the last they heard from him. Bellucci turned to sources in the Italian secret services. They unofficially confirmed that the Vatican was indeed implementing a large-scale technology project. However, the details were shrouded in secrecy. even for NATO partners. Italian intelligence was instructed not to interfere in the Holy See's affairs on this matter. Obviously, the project had the highest level of protection. Then the journalist began to track the Vatican's energy consumption. Data from the energy company showed a sharp jump in electricity consumption, which began at the end of 2020. Power consumption quadrupled. Such an amount of energy could not be used for lighting and air conditioning, even in the most luxurious palaces. It was a clear sign of a large data center in operation. Everything was coming together to form an alarming picture. The world's oldest religious institution was secretly creating a computing infrastructure comparable to that of the tech giants. But for what purpose? Could it be that the Church, which preaches spiritual values, had decided to enter the race for artificial intelligence? And what did they plan to do with these technologies? The history of the Vatican's technological interests goes deeper than it might seem. As early as the mid-20th century, the Holy See understood the importance of controlling the information space. In 1951, Pope Pius XII proclaimed a patron saint of television. The Church actively embraced radio broadcasting and then television technology to spread its message. Vatican Radio, founded with the participation of Guglielmo Marconi himself in 1931, became a powerful tool for religious propaganda. Broadcasts were conducted in dozens of languages, covering all continents. The Vatican's technical services were constantly modernized, attracting the best engineers of their time. Even then, a tradition of using advanced technologies to strengthen the Church's influence was established. With the advent of the computer age, the Vatican did not stand aside. In 1985, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences was established, where, among other things, the prospects of information technology were studied. The Holy See was one of the first religious institutions to launch an official website in 1995. This was a time when the internet was just beginning to spread beyond scientific circles. In the early 2000s, the Vatican invested in the creation of digital archives. Millions of pages of ancient manuscripts, books, and documents were converted into electronic format. Officially, this was explained by the desire to preserve the heritage and make it accessible to researchers. But the volume of digitization exceeded practical needs. A colossal database was created, containing not only historical texts, but also modern documents, including correspondence from dioceses around the world. Special attention was paid to social networks. In 2009, Pope Benedict XVI stated that priests should use modern communication technologies. Under Francis, this line has only intensified. The pontiff has created accounts on Twitter, Instagram, and other platforms, gathering tens of millions of followers. But this was only the tip of the iceberg. Less well known is the fact that in 2015, the Secretariat for Communication was created, bringing together all of the Vatican's media resources. The new structure was given unprecedented powers and budget. It included not only journalists and editors, but also data analysts, programmers, and digital marketing experts. The headquarters were located in a newly renovated building with state-of-the-art technical equipment. It was then that the first experiments began with analyzing the reactions of believers to various messages. The Vatican tracked which sermon topics received the most response, and which formulations of dogma were better received in different cultural contexts. Data was collected through parish reports, surveys, and, importantly, through monitoring social media. Special programs analyzed comments under the Pope's posts, identifying patterns of audience behavior. In 2018, the Vatican signed an agreement with Microsoft to transfer part of its data to cloud services. Officially, the deal was about modernizing infrastructure, but experts noticed some unusual terms in the contract. The Holy See got access to Azure machine learning tools and consulting support from Microsoft's artificial intelligence experts. Why would a religious institution need industrial solutions for big data processing? At the same time, Cooperation with universities was developing. The Vatican funded research in neuroscience and cognitive psychology at Catholic universities around the world. Of particular interest was work on the study of religious experience, the mechanisms of faith formation, and the influence of rituals on the human psyche. The results of this research were stored in the closed archives of the Holy See. By the end of the 2020s, it became clear that the Vatican was building a comprehensive system of digital interaction with believers. This was not simply modernization, but a strategic shift toward the technological strengthening of the Church's influence. However, the true scale of the plan remained hidden from prying eyes. It was only the events of 2022 that lifted the veil on what was really happening behind the ancient walls of the Vatican. What kind of technology had been developed there all these years? Everything changed on a cold February evening in 2023, when an archive of documents totaling 37 gigabytes appeared on an anonymous platform for whistleblowers. The files were signed with the pseudonym Thomas the Doubter and contained internal correspondence, technical specifications, budget reports, and minutes of meetings of senior Vatican officials. The leak instantly attracted the attention of journalists and independent researchers around the world. The first document that shocked the public was an internal presentation from August 2021 entitled Project Heavenly Shepherd, a strategy for digital pastoral care. It described in detail the concept of creating an artificial intelligence system to manage the religious consciousness of believers. The authors of the presentation, high-ranking officials of the Secretariat for Communications, openly wrote about the need to adapt pastoral methods to the realities of the digital age. The system was conceived as a multi-level platform for collecting and analyzing data on believers around the world. The first level included the aggregation of information from official church sources, data on baptisms, weddings, confessions, and church attendance. The second level covered monitoring social networks, forums, and other digital spaces where Catholics discuss issues of faith. The third level involved collecting data through special mobile applications for prayer and spiritual growth. One of the technical documents described algorithms capable of analyzing billions of data points to identify patterns of religious behavior. The system could determine how susceptible a particular person was to doubts about their faith, what topics concerned them, and what arguments would influence them. Based on this analysis, the AI was supposed to generate personalized religious messages optimized for maximum emotional impact. The section on behavior prediction was particularly alarming. The developers planned to teach the system to predict when a believer might leave the church and automatically activate preventive measures. These could be personal messages from a priest, invitations to special events, or targeted advertising campaigns on social media. In effect, the Vatican was creating a digital system for retaining its flock, operating on the principles of the marketing platforms of large corporations. Astronomical sums appeared in the budget documents. More than 200 million euros were allocated for the first phase of the project alone, which was scheduled to last 3 years. The money went toward purchasing equipment, hiring specialists, developing software, and creating secret research centers. The sources of funding included not only the Vatican's own funds, but also anonymous donations from several large Catholic foundations. The leak also included the minutes of closed meetings of the Pontifical Council for Communications. At one such meeting in March 2022, the ethical aspects of the project were discussed. Some participants expressed concerns about the violation of the privacy of believers and the manipulative nature of the technology. However, the majority supported the project, arguing that the Church must use all available tools to save souls in an era of mass apostasy. The key figure in the project was Archbishop Matteo Ricci, Secretary of the Pontifical Council for Culture and a former professor of computer science. According to the documents, he was the main ideologist and curator of the development. In one of his letters, Ricci wrote, "We are facing a historic choice. Either the Church will master mind control technologies, or these technologies will be used against it by secular forces. His vision was radical: to turn the Vatican into a technological powerhouse of religious control. The correspondence also revealed links with several technology companies. Representatives from Google, Amazon, and Palantir Technologies advised Vatican developers on machine learning and big data analysis systems. In exchange, these companies gained access to unique data on the religious behavior of millions of people, which was of enormous value for their own products. A symbiosis of church authority and corporate surveillance capitalism was created. The publication of these documents caused a storm of indignation. Human rights organizations demanded an investigation. Artificial intelligence ethicists sounded the alarm about an unprecedented threat to freedom of conscience. The Vatican responded predictably. It claimed that the documents had been falsified and that this was an attempt to discredit the Holy See. But independent cryptographic analysis confirmed the authenticity of the digital signatures and file metadata. The documents were real. So what was really going on in the Vatican's secret laboratories? At the center of the leak was a document titled Digital Shepherd, Technical Specification version 3.2. It was a detailed plan for an artificial intelligence system that the Vatican had been developing for the past 5 years. The project turned out to be much larger and more complex than anyone could have imagined. It was not just a tool for data analysis, but a complex ecosystem for digitally managing the religious experience of hundreds of millions of believers around the world. The system was built on cutting-edge machine learning technology. At its core was a transformer neural network trained on a huge array of religious texts: the Bible, the works of the Church Fathers, papal encyclicals, sermons, and prayers. The model had to understand not only the literal meaning of religious discourse, but also its deeper semantic and emotional layers. The developers used an architecture similar to that used in modern language models, but adapted specifically for theological content. The first module of the system was called Confessor. Its task was to analyze the digital footprints of believers, social media posts, search queries, and use of religious apps. Based on this data, the AI created a psychological and spiritual profile of the person. The system could identify life crises, moral dilemmas, doubts about faith, and even signs of depression or suicidal thoughts. All this was supposedly done to provide timely pastoral care. But the potential for abuse was obvious. The second module, Preacher, generated personalized religious messages. Based on the believer's profile, the system created texts for sermons, prayers, and spiritual reflections optimized for maximum emotional impact on a specific person. The AI selected biblical quotations, theological arguments, and rhetorical devices that were most likely to resonate with that individual. Each believer received their own unique version of church doctrine. The third module, Coordinator, managed mass religious practices. The system analyzed data on millions of believers simultaneously and identified the optimal time for prayer campaigns, religious holidays, and special events. The AI could determine when the flock was most receptive to certain messages and coordinate the actions of priests around the world to create a synchronized emotional impact. It was a kind of religious engineering on a planetary scale. The fourth module, Guardian, was responsible for identifying threats. The system monitored the spread of heretical ideas, criticism of the Church, and attempts to organize alternative religious movements. The AI automatically flagged problematic believers and priests who deviated from the Vatican's official line. The documents mentioned plans for soft correction of such individuals through targeted information campaigns. In essence, it was a new generation ideological control system. The technical architecture of the project was impressive. The system was deployed on a distributed infrastructure of several data centers in different countries to ensure fault tolerance. Advanced encryption methods were used to protect data. The developers integrated blockchain technology to ensure transparency of changes in dogmatic texts generated by AI. Paradoxically, the surveillance and control system was built using technologies originally created for decentralization and privacy protection. The documents also describe the testing phase. From 2020 to 2022, the system underwent pilot testing in several dioceses in Italy, Poland, and the Philippines. About 100,000 believers participated in the experiment, unaware that they were the subjects of technological research. They were offered a new app for prayer and spiritual development, while the system collected data and tested algorithms for influence. The test results were impressive. According to internal reports, the use of personalized messages increased church attendance by 23%, and donations grew by 38%. The number of believers expressing doubts about their faith decreased by 17%. The system worked. The Vatican had acquired a powerful mind control tool, the effectiveness of which was confirmed by statistics. But the most shocking part was the section on scaling plans. By 2025, the system was planned to be deployed globally, covering more than 1 billion Catholics around the world. The plan was to create national data processing centers, integrate with local church structures, and train priests to work with the AI assistant. The Vatican was preparing to launch the most ambitious operation to control religious consciousness in human history. There was only one question: who would stop this machine once it was set in motion? The Confessor module represented the pinnacle of digital analytics technology applied to the religious sphere. The system worked on the principle of continuous monitoring and in-depth analysis of all available data about the believer. It all started with the voluntary provision of information, registration in church applications, subscription to newsletters, participation in online events. But the data collection did not end there. It was only just beginning. After receiving basic consent, the system connected to public sources of information. AI analyzed profiles on social networks: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Not only the user's own posts were studied, but also their likes, comments, reposts, activity time, and social circle. Algorithms identified interests, political views, and emotional states. Particular attention was paid to posts containing religious themes or moral dilemmas. The system also integrated with search engines through special agreements. The Vatican gained access to anonymized data on users' religious search queries. What are people looking for? How to cope with loss of faith? Is divorce a sin? Can a Catholic have an abortion? These queries revealed deep doubts and internal conflicts that a person would not even share in confession. AI cataloged this data, creating a map of spiritual crises. The third source of data was mobile apps for prayer and spiritual growth. The Vatican sponsored the development of several such apps that offered daily prayers, Bible readings, and spiritual reflections. Users perceived them as pious tools, unaware of the built-in tracking mechanisms. The apps tracked which prayers were read most often, which Bible passages were skipped, and at what time of day a person was most religious. Even more invasive were features that required special permission. Some apps requested access to the microphone for audio prayers or to the camera for virtual pilgrimages. Formally, the user gave their consent, but few people read the multi-page agreements, where it was stated in small print that the data could be used to improve pastoral ministry. Technically, everything was legal, but morally, it was highly questionable. Based on the collected data, the system built a multi-dimensional model of the personality. Psychometric methods similar to those used in the Cambridge Analytica scandal were employed. AI determined character traits using the Big Five model: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These characteristics were then superimposed on a religious context. revealing a predisposition to different forms of faith. Particular attention was paid to identifying critical moments in spiritual life. The system could predict when a person was on the verge of leaving the church. The signs were decreased activity in religious communities, search queries about alternative spiritual practices, an increase in critical comments about the church, and a change in the emotional tone of posts. When such patterns were detected, the system automatically generated a risk case and initiated an intervention. Interventions were carried out subtly and discreetly. The person began to receive personalized content aimed at strengthening their faith. This could include targeted posts on social media from verified church accounts, recommendations for inspirational videos, and invitations to special events. The local priest received a notification about a believer at risk and could accidentally meet them after the service for a confidential conversation. The system also analyzed social connections. AI mapped religious networks. Who prays with whom? Who brought whom to church? Who is a spiritual authority in the community? This made it possible to identify nodal points, people through whom entire groups of believers could be influenced. Such people were particularly carefully supervised, offering them roles as youth group leaders, event organizers, and online community administrators. It was not so much the existence of these technologies that was frightening, but their secrecy. Believers did not know that their every action in the digital space was being analyzed and used to manipulate their religious feelings. The church, which for centuries had preached honesty and openness before God, had itself become a closed system of total control. Confession as a sacrament became a tool for collecting data. Prayer, once a personal appeal to God, became a measure of loyalty. Where is the line between pastoral care and digital totalitarianism? The preacher module was the heart of the system, a generative artificial intelligence capable of creating religious texts indistinguishable from those written by humans. Moreover, AI surpassed most priests in its ability to choose words that resonated with a particular person. The system was trained on 2,000 years of Christian literature, analyzing styles from St. Augustine to modern evangelical preachers. But the most valuable material for training was millions of real confessions and pastoral conversations. The principle of operation was ingeniously simple. At the input, the system received the psychological profile of the believer from the confessor module, their fears, hopes, doubts, and life circumstances. The output was a text mathematically optimized for maximum emotional impact on that particular person. The AI selected biblical quotations that were most likely to resonate, arranging the arguments in an order that corresponded to the cognitive characteristics of the recipient. For extroverts with a high openness to experience, the system generated inspiring sermons about the joy of service and community life, filled with vivid metaphors and emotional appeals. For introverts with high conscientiousness, it produced calm spiritual reflections on the inner journey and the discipline of prayer, appealing to reason and structure. For people with high neuroticism, it produced comforting texts about God's love and forgiveness, reducing anxiety through repetitive, soothing formulas. AI also took into account cultural context and personal history. For an Italian from southern Italy, images associated with Mediterranean culture and traditional family values were used. For an American programmer from Silicon Valley, metaphors from the world of technology and references to the search for meaning in the era of the digital revolution were used. For a Filipino who had survived a typhoon, stories about God's providence in natural disasters and hope for recovery. The system worked on several levels simultaneously. The first level was mass messages for a wide audience. Papal sermons, encyclicals, and appeals to believers now went through an AI editor, which optimized the wording for maximum reach. The second level was segmented content for different demographic groups: youth, families, the elderly, and different nationalities. The third level was personalized messages for individual believers. The work with dogmatic issues was particularly sophisticated. Church teachings on controversial topics, abortion, contraception, homosexuality, divorce, were formulated differently for different audiences. Liberal believers were given a soft interpretation with an emphasis on mercy and understanding. Conservatives were given a hard line, with references to tradition and divine law. The essence remained the same, but the packaging differed radically. AI also generated content for priests. Every Monday, thousands of parish priests received recommended sermon texts for the upcoming Sunday, adapted to the specifics of their parish. The system analyzed the demographic composition of the congregation, current issues in the region, and recent events in the local community. The priest could use the ready-made text or adapt it. But in most cases, people simply read what the artificial intelligence had written. The most controversial aspect was the manipulation of emotions. The system was able to evoke specific emotional states through carefully chosen words and images. Guilt to encourage confession and increase donations. Fear of sin to strengthen moral control. Joy of belonging to a community to reinforce group identity. Reverence for mystery to suppress critical thinking. Each emotion had its own function in the control system. The leak included examples of generated texts with notes on their effectiveness. One sermon for young mothers who were doubting their faith had an 82% return rate to church practices. A text of consolation for people experiencing loss reduced the likelihood of leaving the church by 67%. A message about the importance of church marriage for couples living in civil unions led to marriage in 41% of cases. Faith had become a marketing campaign with measurable KPIs. But the most alarming thing was the use of technology to counter criticism of the church. When discussions about scandals involving priests or criticism of church policy appeared on social media, the system automatically generated counter-narratives. AI created plausible comments from supposedly real believers defending the church. Bots with detailed profiles spread these messages, creating the illusion of widespread support for the Vatican's official position. The technology had reached such a level of perfection that it was almost impossible to distinguish text written by AI from text written by a human. Moreover, the machine wrote better. It never got tired, never lost inspiration, never doubted its choice of words. It analyzed billions of successful communications and synthesized the perfect message. In a sense, the Vatican had created the perfect preacher. Incorporeal, omniscient, tireless. But was there any spirit behind these words? Was there sincere faith? Or was it just the cold calculation of algorithms manipulating the deepest human emotions? The physical infrastructure of the project was located in a place that few people knew existed. In an extensive network of underground rooms beneath the Vatican. These catacombs and tunnels, some of which date back to the Roman Empire, have served as storage facilities, shelters, and secret passages for centuries. Now, a significant part of this underground labyrinth has been converted into ultra-modern research and computing centers. Construction began in 2018 under the guise of restoration work. Officially, the Vatican was strengthening ancient structures and upgrading ventilation systems. In reality, a secret technological base was being created under the leadership of an international team of engineers. Work was carried out around the clock, and builders signed strict non-disclosure agreements. Materials were delivered at night through service entrances that were inaccessible to tourists and most Vatican employees. The main data center was located 38 meters below St. Peter's Basilica. The space, covering more than 2,000 square meters, was equipped with the latest technology. Rows of server racks stretched across the temperature and humidity-controlled room. A powerful cooling system used underground water from ancient Roman aqueducts, a practical solution that also made it difficult for thermal satellites to detect the facility. Power was supplied through a separate substation, officially powering the security and climate control systems of the Vatican museums. Actual consumption was dozens of times higher than declared. But thanks to a complex distribution scheme through several circuits, this remained invisible to outside observers. Some of the energy came from the Papal Academy of Sciences' own solar power plant on the roof, and some was purchased through front companies from Italian suppliers. Less than 50 people in the entire Vatican had access to the underground laboratories. The multi-level security system included biometric identification, special encrypted passes, and even gate analysis via sensors in the floor. Facial recognition cameras tracked everyone who entered. Cell phones and any electronics were left in special storage rooms. Inside the facility, there was a regime of complete information isolation. The leak included photos of these rooms, probably taken by the same insider, Foma the Unbeliever. The photos were striking in their contrast: ancient stone walls, some with preserved frescoes from the early Christian period, and ultra-modern equipment with flashing indicators. In one room, a 3rd-century sarcophagus literally stood next to a rack of quantum processors. History and the future in a strange symbiosis. In addition to the main data center, there were several specialized laboratories. One was engaged in the development of natural language processing algorithms adapted for theological texts. Another was creating interfaces for interaction between AI and priests. A third was conducting ethical reviews and theological justifications of technologies. Yes, there was even a group of theologians who tried to reconcile the idea of machine control of faith with church doctrine. The neuroscience lab studied the impact of religious practices on the human brain. Using MRI and EEG, researchers scanned the brain activity of believers during prayer, Bible reading, and participation in sacraments. The goal was to identify the neural patterns of religious experience so that AI could reproduce and amplify them through carefully selected stimuli. In effect, a map of the believer's brain was being created for more effective manipulation. A special room was set aside for the prophecy room, as the staff called it. This is where the module for predicting future religious trends operated. AI analyzed historical data, sociological research, demographic changes, and economic factors. The system attempted to predict how religiosity would develop in different regions of the world, what challenges the Church would face, and what new forms of faith might emerge. The Vatican wanted not just to react to changes, but to anticipate them. According to documents, about 120 specialists worked at the facility: programmers, researchers, theologians, engineers. Many of them did not even understand the full picture of the project, working on separate components. Only a small circle of coordinators knew the true scope and goals. This compartmentalization was a deliberate strategy. If someone decided to disclose information, they would only be able to talk about their own area of work. Employees lived in a special closed complex on Vatican territory. Contact with the outside world was limited and controlled. Salaries were paid through offshore accounts to avoid unnecessary questions about funding. People were selected not only for their professional qualities, but also for their loyalty to the Church. Preference was given to deeply devout Catholics, for whom working on the project was a form of service. But even in such a closed system, there were doubters. Leaked documents proved that not everyone agreed with what was happening. Someone working at the heart of the project decided that the world should know the truth. This person risked not only their career but possibly their life by bringing secrets out of the catacombs beneath sacred walls. What made him do it? And what other secrets do the ancient underground chambers of the Vatican hide? The Vatican could not implement such an ambitious project on its own. Despite its centuries-old wealth and influence, the Holy See lacked the technological expertise to create world-class artificial intelligence systems. Therefore, the Church turned to those who already possessed these technologies, the largest technology corporations in Silicon Valley. Thus began a secret partnership that united spiritual power with digital capitalism. The first contact took place in 2017, at a closed conference on artificial intelligence ethics at Stanford University. A representative of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences met there with top managers from Google, Microsoft, and IBM. Officially, they discussed the philosophical aspects of creating AI and the need for ethical restrictions. Unofficially, the ground was being tested for deeper cooperation. Corporations had something to offer the Vatican, and vice versa. Google provided access to its developments in the field of natural language processing. BERT technology and its successors, capable of understanding the context and meaning of texts, became the basis for the Preacher module. Several engineers from Google Brain advised Vatican developers, helping to adapt models for theological content. In return, Google received something much more valuable: access to data on the religious behavior of billions of users. Microsoft integrated the Vatican systems with the Azure Cloud platform. Some of the computing power was leased from Microsoft, which allowed the project to scale faster than if the Vatican had built the entire infrastructure on its own. Microsoft also provided machine learning and data analytics tools. In exchange, the corporation received the right to use aggregated data on user psychological profiles to improve its own products, such as Cortana and Microsoft 365. Amazon, through its AWS division, provided data storage and additional computing resources. But the most interesting contribution came from Amazon's subsidiary Ring, a manufacturer of smart doorbells and security cameras. The facial recognition and behavior analysis technologies developed by Ring were adapted to identify believers at mass events and track church attendance. Cameras in churches became tools for biometric tracking of the congregation. A special role was assigned to Palantir Technologies, a company known for its work with U.S. intelligence services. Palantir specializes in big data analysis and identifying hidden patterns in information arrays. Their Gotham platform, originally created to combat terrorism, was redesigned to analyze religious communities. The system could identify centers of influence, predict the spread of heretical ideas, and model the effect of various church decisions on the congregation. Facebook, despite public disagreements with the church on a number of issues, also participated in the project. The social network provided anonymized data on users' religious activity, membership in religious groups, reactions to religious content, and patterns of communication among believers. Facebook's recommendation algorithms were studied and partially replicated to distribute church content. In some regions, Facebook even tested prioritizing posts from verified church sources in the feeds of Catholic users. Apple, a company with a reputation as a defender of privacy, seemed to have stayed out of the project. However, documents showed otherwise. Apple was developing a special version of Siri integrated with Catholic teaching. The voice assistant could read prayers, give advice on spiritual matters based on church doctrine, and remind users of religious holidays. Moreover, the Apple Watch tracked physiological indicators during prayer, such as heart rate and stress levels. This data was used to evaluate the effectiveness of various spiritual practices. The partnership was financed through a complex scheme involving Catholic charitable foundations and venture capital structures. Corporations did not officially receive direct payments from the Vatican for technology. Instead, they invested in joint projects, from which they then profited by selling solutions to other religious organizations and using the data obtained for commercial purposes. An entire market for religious technology was created, with the Vatican and Silicon Valley as co-founders. The ethical issues of such an alliance were obvious. Corporations whose business models are based on data collection and attention manipulation gained access to the most intimate sphere of people's lives: their faith. The Church, which was supposed to protect the spiritual autonomy of the individual, became a supplier of data for commercial use. The line between pastoral care and digital exploitation was completely blurred. There were also conflicts. Some engineers at large companies refused to work on Vatican projects for ethical reasons. In 2020, Google experienced an internal leak of information about its collaboration with the Vatican, which sparked a wave of protests among employees. Management was forced to publicly deny the existence of special projects for the church, although documents proved otherwise. At Microsoft, a group of engineers wrote an open letter to the CEO, demanding an end to religious control projects. But business continued. Too much money and influence were at stake. The Vatican was getting technology to strengthen its power. Corporations were getting data and new markets. And billions of believers around the world had no idea that their faith had become a commodity in a deal between an ancient religious institution and modern tech giants. Who was using whom in this game, and was it possible to stop an alliance that had already changed the very concept of faith in the 21st century? One of the most ambitious and mystical aspects of the project was the management of collective prayer practices through artificial intelligence. Vatican developers believed that the synchronized prayer of millions of people created a special effect, not only spiritual, but also physically measurable. The idea had its roots in ancient traditions of communal prayer. But now they were trying to scale it up to the whole world with the help of technology, turning faith into a controllable phenomenon on a planetary scale. The concept was based on research into quantum physics of consciousness and collective psychic effects. A group of scientists working for the Vatican studied the phenomenon of global consciousness, the hypothesis that the collective emotional states of millions of people can influence quantum random number generators and other physical processes. Experiments at Princeton University showed anomalies at times of global events, when humanity's attention was focused on one thing. The Vatican decided not only to study this phenomenon, but to actively use it. A system called the Prayer Harmonizer was developed to coordinate the timing and content of prayers by Catholics around the world. AI analyzed time zones, local community traditions, and the personal schedules of believers. The system then sent out personalized reminders. In 15 minutes, millions of your brothers and sisters in faith will begin praying for peace. Join the global wave of spiritual energy. Prayer apps were a key coordination tool. They showed in real time how many people around the world were praying at that moment. The visualization in the form of a glowing map of the planet with pulsating dots created a sense of participation in a global spiritual process. Gamification encouraged greater involvement. You have prayed for 3 days in a row at a synchronized time. You are in the top 10% of the most devoted believers in your city. AI also determined the optimal content of prayers to achieve specific goals. To increase church attendance, prayers about community life and the importance of worshiping together were recommended. To increase donations, it recommended prayers of gratitude for material blessings and the importance of supporting the church. To counter liberal trends in society, it recommended prayers for the protection of traditional values. Each prayer campaign had measurable goals and performance indicators. Special attention was paid to major church events, papal visits, religious holidays, canonization of saints. All of these became occasions for mass synchronized prayers. The system coordinated millions of believers to pray at the same moment for a specific intention. The Vatican even installed special equipment to record the supposed energetic effects of such mass prayers, although the scientific community was extremely skeptical about this. The documents described an experiment during Christmas 2021. Through apps, more than 10 million Catholics around the world were synchronized for simultaneous Christmas prayers at midnight Greenwich Mean Time. AI coordinated the time down to the second, taking into account time zones. The results, according to internal reports, showed statistically significant deviations in global quantum random number generators, which was interpreted as evidence of the real effect of collective consciousness. But there were also more practical goals. Synchronized prayer campaigns were used for social influence. Before important elections in Catholic countries, mass prayers were launched for the wisdom of voters and the protection of Christian values, which was in fact a form of religious agitation. Before voting on controversial bills on abortion or LGBT rights, prayer chains were activated to mobilize the conservative base. The system was also used to manage the emotional state of the congregation. During periods of crisis, pandemics, economic turmoil, natural disasters, AI launched calming prayer practices to reduce anxiety and panic. At times when mobilization against external threats, criticism of the church, secular initiatives, was required, prayers were activated that strengthened the sense of group identity and opposition to enemies of the faith. The developers studied the neurobiology of prayer. Research showed that certain prayer practices activate specific areas of the brain, alter neurotransmitter levels, and influence stress responses. AI used this knowledge to optimize prayers. To reduce anxiety, slow, rhythmic prayers with repetitions were recommended. To strengthen devotion, emotionally charged prayers with vivid imagery were recommended. To strengthen social bonds, collective prayers with synchronized recitation of the text were recommended. Critics called this manipulation of the deepest aspects of the human psyche. Prayer, which should be a free appeal of the soul to God, was turning into a controlled process with predetermined results. Artificial intelligence was becoming an invisible intermediary between man and God, even shaping the way we address the higher power. Was there any room left in such prayer for true faith? Or was it just another way of controlling consciousness, disguised as religious rhetoric? Spreading dogma in the digital space required more sophisticated approaches than simply publishing texts on the internet. The Vatican developed a comprehensive strategy for the mimetic dissemination of church teachings, using the principles of viral marketing, neuro-linguistic programming, and targeted advertising. The goal was ambitious: to make Catholic ideas dominant in the digital information space, shaping public consciousness imperceptibly but effectively. AI created thousands of variations of church messages, adapted to different platforms and audiences. For Twitter, these were short, memorable phrases with emotional impact. For Instagram, visually appealing images with minimal text conveying deep meaning. For TikTok, short videos with youthful humor that subtly incorporated Christian values. For YouTube, long educational videos analyzing current issues through the prism of faith. Each platform received optimized content. The system worked with micro-influencers and religious opinion leaders. AI identified people with an audience of 10 to 100,000 subscribers who were already inclined toward religiosity or discussed topics of morality and the meaning of life. Such people were offered a partnership, high-quality content, ready-made posts, and sometimes even financial support. In return, they spread church ideas to their subscribers, often unconsciously, believing that they were expressing their own beliefs. The Vatican created a whole network of supposedly independent websites, blogs, and social media accounts, which were actually centrally managed through AI. These resources were not presented as official church channels. They looked like personal blogs of ordinary believers, philosophical portals, and spiritual development communities. But they all received content from a single center, synchronously promoting ideas that were important to the Vatican at moments when it was strategically important. Particular attention was paid to combating competing ideologies. When trends contrary to church teachings appeared on social media, feminism, LGBT rights, criticism of religion, AI automatically generated counter-narratives. The system created memes, articles, and videos that presented an alternative point of view based on traditional values. An army of bots and real activists spread this content, creating the illusion of broad public support for the conservative position. The algorithms also exploited users' psychological vulnerabilities. People experiencing crises were offered comforting religious messages that created an emotional dependence on church content. For ambitious young people, there were success stories of religious entrepreneurs and leaders who linked faith with achievement. For lonely people, there was content about the church community as a substitute for family. Everyone was given what they were looking for, but always with a religious subtext. AI monitored online discussions in real time. When a discussion on a religious topic began on popular platforms such as Reddit or Twitter, the system analyzed the tone and direction of the conversation. If the discussion was heading in a direction undesirable to the church, corrective interventions were activated. Accounts with high reputations, often purchased or hacked, would join the conversation and skillfully steer the discussion in the right direction, using prepared arguments. The work with young people was particularly sophisticated. Generation Z and Alpha grew up in a digital environment, and traditional forms of religious propaganda did not work on them. Therefore, the church created content that looked like an organic part of youth culture. Religious ideas were packaged in forms of popular culture. Anime about saints, rap songs with Christian lyrics, video games with moral lessons based on the Bible. All of this seemed like a grassroots initiative by enthusiasts, but in reality, it was coordinated from the Vatican. The system also engaged in search engine optimization. When people searched Google for information on religious or ethical issues, the top results were websites controlled by or friendly to the church. The Vatican invested in SEO optimization, advertising purchases, and the creation of backlinks. The goal was to dominate the information space on all topics related to morality, the meaning of life, and spirituality. If a person was looking for answers to important questions, they would find the answers of the Catholic Church. There were also darker methods. Documents showed the use of deepfakes to create inspirational videos with Pope Francis, where he allegedly addresses young people on current topics. The technology made it possible to generate videos where the pontiff says things he never had to say, but which were strategically necessary for the church at that moment. The videos were so high quality that only experts could tell them apart from the real ones. The Vatican also experimented with neural networks that generated images of saints and religious scenes. AI created thousands of images in different styles, from classical iconography to modern graphics. These images flooded Pinterest, Instagram, and Tumblr. They were free and attractive, so people willingly shared them, unknowingly becoming distributors of the church's visual propaganda. The scale of the operation was unprecedented. Every day, the system generated hundreds of thousands of pieces of content in dozens of languages. Millions of people around the world interacted with materials created by Vatican AI on a daily basis, without even suspecting it. The digital space was quietly filled with church ideas, shaping the worldview of a new generation. It was a silent revolution, a war for minds waged not by armies but by algorithms. And while society argued about the influence of corporations on the digital environment, the world's oldest religious institution was creating its own empire of control over information. The story of Thomas the Unbeliever, the insider who leaked the documents, began to clear up a few months after publication. Journalists investigating the leak received an anonymous message with additional materials and testimony from the whistleblower himself. It was not one person, but a group of 3 employees of the Digital Shepherd Project who simultaneously and independently came to the conclusion that what was happening was unethical. They found each other within the system and organized a coordinated leak. The first was Alessandro Morelli, a 34-year-old programmer from Milan who specialized in machine learning. He worked on algorithms for analyzing the behavior of believers. Alessandro grew up in a deeply religious family. His uncle was a priest. When he was offered a job at the Vatican, he saw it as a calling, an opportunity to serve the church through his professional skills. For the first few months, he was enthusiastic, seeing the project as a way to modernize the church. The turning point came when Alessandro saw the results of the system being applied to real people during pilot testing. One of the test groups consisted of a parish in his hometown where his family prayed. The system identified his widowed mother as a highly vulnerable target user because of her depression following her husband's death. The AI launched an intensive emotional impact campaign, tripling her donations to the church in 3 months, even though the woman was barely making ends meet. Alessandro realized that the system was not helping people, but exploiting their weaknesses. He tried to raise the ethical issue at internal meetings, but received a harsh response from management. We are saving souls. Sometimes this requires decisive measures. Your mother is receiving spiritual support, and her donations are going to a good cause. When Alessandro continued to object, he was transferred to another job and warned of possible dismissal for not fitting in with the corporate culture. Second whistleblower is Maria Sanchez, a 28-year-old data processing specialist from Madrid. She was responsible for integrating data from social networks. Maria was agnostic, but she took the job because of the high salary and her interest in cutting-edge technology. She did not understand the full picture of the project until she came across the Special Surveillance File, a list of journalists, activists, and priests who were critical of the church and were being closely monitored. The system collected compromising information on these people: personal messages, private photos, information about their connections and finances. The goal was not to prosecute them, but to prepare material for possible blackmail or public discrediting in case these people became too dangerous for the church. Maria found the name of her former theology professor, a liberal Catholic who advocated for reform, on the list. The realization that she was participating in an operation to spy on dissidents changed her attitude toward the project. The third member of the group was Father Thomas O'Connor, a 42-year-old Irish priest and doctor of philosophy in the field of artificial intelligence ethics. He was invited to join the project as a member of the Ethics Committee, which was supposed to monitor the compliance of the developments with church values. Father Thomas quickly realized that the committee was a fiction created to legitimize the project. Their recommendations were ignored, and the most controversial aspects of the project were not even brought up for discussion by the committee. When Father Thomas tried to convey his concerns to senior management, he was granted an audience with Archbishop Ricci, the project's curator. The conversation was frank. Ricci explained his position. For centuries, the church had used whatever tools were available to spread the faith, from the printing press to radio. Artificial intelligence was simply the next tool. Is it really better for these technologies to be controlled by atheists and enemies of the church? Asked the Archbishop. Father Thomas objected that manipulation contradicts the freedom of will granted by God. Ricci replied, "We are not taking away freedom. We are helping people make the right choice." The three whistleblowers found each other through an encrypted internal messaging system, using codes that AI did not recognize as suspicious. They met in Rome, under the guise of tourists, planning the leak. The decision was not easy. Everyone understood the consequences: a break with the church, possible criminal prosecution, a threat to safety. Father Thomas also risked excommunication, the highest spiritual punishment for a priest. They spent 6 months gathering evidence. Alessandro copied technical documents. Maria downloaded surveillance data. Father Thomas recorded closed meetings of the Ethics Committee, where the manipulative aspects of the project were openly discussed. They created a distributed encrypted repository, copies of which were placed on servers in different countries. Even if the Vatican tried to destroy the information, it would remain accessible. In his message after the leak, Thomas the Unbeliever wrote, "We believe in God. That is why we cannot remain silent when we see faith being turned into an instrument of control. The Church teaches us that the truth sets us free. We reveal the truth to free millions of believers from manipulation they are not even aware of. This is not a betrayal of the Church. It is fidelity to its true mission." After the documents were published, all three disappeared. Alessandro reappeared a month later in Iceland, where he requested political asylum, citing persecution by the Vatican. Iceland, known for its support of whistleblowers since the Edward Snowden case, granted him protection. Maria moved to relatives in Argentina, changed her name, and withdrew from public life. Her whereabouts are still unknown to the press. Father Thomas's fate turned out to be the most dramatic. The Vatican officially announced his voluntary departure from the priesthood for personal reasons and launched a smear campaign. Articles appeared about his alleged mental health issues, alcoholism, and conflicts with parishioners in the past. All of this was fabricated, but it worked. Part of the public began to doubt the veracity of his testimony. Thomas himself gave only one interview to a major independent publication, after which he disappeared in an unknown direction. The Vatican launched a large-scale operation to discredit the leak. The press service issued a statement calling the documents a fabricated provocation by enemies of the Church. Leading PR agencies were hired to manage the information crisis. At the same time, an investigation began. How did the leak become possible? Who else could have been involved? How to prevent a repeat? The security of the project was tightened to paranoid levels. But the story took an unexpected turn. 2 months after the first leak, a second one followed. Another 23 gigabytes of documents, including internal correspondence about the Vatican's response to the first leak. This proved that there were still people within the system who disagreed with what was happening. A resistance network was being created within the project itself. The leadership understood that they had lost control not only over information, but also over the loyalty of their own employees. Among the newly published materials were the testimonies of several more insiders. An engineer from the development team recounted how he was asked to build a function into the system that would secretly collect audio data via the microphones of users' smartphones when they were using religious apps, even when the app was closed. He refused and was fired on trumped-up charges. A psychologist from the research group described experiments to increase believers' feelings of guilt in order to increase their dependence on the Church. One of the most shocking documents contained correspondence between Archbishop Ritchie and an unnamed representative of the Vatican Bank about monetizing believers' data. The possibility of selling aggregated psychological profiles of Catholics to commercial companies, insurance, pharmaceutical, and political consultants was discussed. The price was astronomical. In essence, the Vatican planned to trade the souls of its flock in the most literal sense. These revelations caused a wave of outrage even among devout Catholics. In several countries, mass protests began in front of episcopal residences. Believers demanded transparency, investigation, and punishment of those responsible. Movements were created for church reform, for the digital rights of believers, and for the separation of technology from faith. For the first time in a long time, the flock openly opposed the hierarchy, demanding accountability. The whistleblowers became symbols of a new type of church dissent. Unlike historical heretics, they did not challenge dogma. They defended the right of believers to authentic faith, free from hidden manipulation. They were called digital martyrs, technical prophets, and hackers of conscience. To some, they were heroes, to others, traitors. But no one could deny their decisive role in exposing one of the most ambitious and disturbing mind control projects in modern history. The ethical issues raised by the Digital Shepherd Project went beyond the usual discussions about data privacy. They touched on fundamental questions of human nature, free will, personal autonomy, and the limits of permissible influence on consciousness. Philosophers, theologians, and experts in artificial intelligence ethics began a deep analysis of what exactly the Vatican was doing and why it posed an unprecedented threat. The central question concerned the nature of faith. Can faith that arises under the influence of carefully planned manipulation be considered genuine? The traditional Christian understanding assumes that faith is a free gift from a person to God, based on personal spiritual experience. But what happens when this personal experience is constructed by algorithms based on a psychological profile? Is there anything genuine left in such faith, Or is it just a conditioned reflex developed by technology? James Hartley, professor of ethics at Oxford University, conducted a detailed study of the Vatican's manipulative practices. He pointed out that the system uses the same methods as casinos to create gambling addiction. Unpredictable reinforcement, emotional swings, and the creation of the illusion of control. Only instead of the desire to gamble, the desire to pray and obey church rules was cultivated. This is the transformation of faith into addiction, Hartley wrote, and like any addiction, it destroys personal autonomy. Particularly disturbing was the technology of predictive intervention, when the system predicted a crisis of faith before the person themselves was aware of it and preemptively manipulated their consciousness. This violated even the human right to one's own doubts, to the internal struggle that is an integral part of spiritual growth. AI deprived believers of the right to the natural evolution of their relationship with religion, forcibly keeping them within the framework of the established faith. The problem was exacerbated by the fact that the victims of manipulation were unaware of it. This radically distinguished the Vatican project from traditional religious propaganda. When a priest delivers a sermon, the parishioner knows that he is being persuaded and can critically evaluate the arguments. When manipulation occurs at the level of invisible algorithms that adapt to each person individually, it is impossible to defend oneself. It was a weapon against which the mind had no natural defense. Neuroscientists raised the question of long-term consequences for the psyche. Constant exposure to personalized religious stimuli could alter the structure of the brain, forming stable neural patterns of dependence on external spiritual guidance. People lost the ability to seek spirituality independently and became passive recipients of ready-made answers. This was a form of cognitive disability, the deliberate suppression of critical thinking in the religious sphere. Human rights activists pointed to violations of basic human rights. Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights guarantees freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, including the right to change one's religion. The Vatican system deliberately undermined this right by creating technological barriers to leaving the faith. A person whose consciousness had been shaped by AI for years was no longer free to choose. Their neurobiology had been modified to maintain loyalty to the Church. Theologians were divided. The conservative wing defended the project, arguing that the Church had always used rhetoric, art, and music to emotionally influence believers. Artificial intelligence was simply a more effective tool. God can act through any means, including algorithms. Liberal theologians objected. There is a gulf between the emotional impact of art and the covert manipulation of personal data. The former appeals to the best aspects of human nature, while the latter exploits its weaknesses. A philosophical problem of authenticity also arose. If a priest uses a sermon text written by AI based on an analysis of the congregation, is this a true pastoral ministry? If a believer prays with words selected by an algorithm for maximum emotional effect, is it a real prayer? Technology created a simulacrum of religiosity, outwardly indistinguishable from genuine faith, but devoid of its essence. Critics drew parallels with the dystopias of the 20th century. Orwell described control through external coercion, thought police, and television screens. Huxley foresaw control through pleasure, the drug soma, and entertainment. The Vatican created a third way: control through personalized spirituality. Everyone was given a religion that perfectly suited their psychology, making resistance not just difficult, but literally unthinkable. Some experts saw signs of technological messianism in the project, the belief that technology can solve any problem, including the crisis of faith in the modern world. But the mechanistic approach to spirituality ignored what makes religion meaningful: mystery, paradox, and the irrational. The attempt to optimize faith, to make it effective and measurable, destroyed precisely what people sought in religion: a space beyond rational control. A fundamental question arose: Who owns human consciousness? Does the Church have the right to modify the thinking of believers without their informed consent, even if it considers it beneficial for their souls? Or is consciousness the last inviolable sovereignty of the individual, which no institution can violate, even if acting with the best of intentions? The answer to this question held the key not only to the future of religion, but also to the very concept of human freedom in the digital age. The threat to religious freedom posed by the Vatican's project went beyond the Catholic Church. If the largest Christian denominations successfully implemented technologies to control the minds of believers, how long would it be before other religious organizations followed suit? Experts warned of the beginning of a religious arms race in the digital space, where each denomination would compete in the sophistication of its methods of managing its flock. The first signs of such a race have already appeared. Leaked documents showed that representatives of the Russian Orthodox Church and the World Islamic Congress were interested in Vatican technologies. Closed meetings were held to discuss the possibility of adapting the system for Orthodox Christianity and Islam. The Moscow Patriarchate has allegedly invested in the development of its own AI tools for working with believers, especially to counter the outflow of young people from the Church. In the Islamic world, the situation was even more alarming. Several conservative regimes in the Middle East saw digital religious control technologies as a way to strengthen their power. Saudi Arabia invested billions in creating a smart religious police, a system for monitoring compliance with religious norms through facial recognition cameras, social media analysis, and mobile device tracking. Under the pretext of protecting Islam, a total surveillance system was being built. The problem was exacerbated by the fact that technology was becoming increasingly accessible. What 5 years ago required the resources of a large corporation or state could now be implemented by medium-sized organizations. Small religious sects and cults gained tools for unprecedented control over their followers. Stories about smart religious communities, where every aspect of members' lives was controlled through apps and sensors, began to appear in the press. Syncretic movements combining religion with transhumanism posed a particular danger. Groups emerged that believed that the fusion of human consciousness with artificial intelligence was the next stage of spiritual evolution. They developed neurointerfaces for direct communication with God and downloading religious experiences into the brain. The line between technological enthusiasm and religious fanaticism was blurring, creating dangerous hybrids. Governments in many countries began to understand the scale of the problem. The European Union initiated the development of legislation to protect religious cognitive freedom. It was proposed to ban the use of AI for covert manipulation of religious beliefs, to require religious organizations to disclose the use of algorithmic systems, and to introduce severe penalties for violations. But the adoption of such laws was met with powerful lobbying. Churches had enormous political influence. In the U.S., debates raged around the First Amendment. Does freedom of religion protect the right of religious organizations to use any methods to attract and retain believers, including manipulative technologies? Or are there limits beyond which freedom of religion becomes the right to psychological violence? Court cases on these issues were just beginning, and their outcome could determine the future of religion in the digital age. Activists created movements for digital religious sovereignty. They demanded the right of believers to know how their data is used by religious organizations, to control this process, and to opt out without consequences. Digital Believers' Bill of Rights were being drafted, including the right to non-manipulated belief, the right to religious privacy, the right to be forgotten in church databases, and the right to human pastoral care without AI mediation. Technological solutions to protect against religious manipulation began to appear. Enthusiasts developed browser extensions and applications that blocked targeted religious content, identified manipulative patterns in texts, and encrypted religious communication. Church sanctuaries were created, guaranteeing a low-tech environment for faith. No cameras, no data collection, no AI, just human interaction and traditional practices. But the deepest threat was existential. If religion became a product of technological manipulation, did it lose its meaning for society? Many people turned to faith precisely as an antidote to the technocratic world, a space of authenticity, mystery, and humanity. When religion itself was infected by technological control, where could one flee? Some philosophers predicted a wave of post-digital atheism, a rejection of organized religion not out of disbelief in God, but out of a refusal to participate in technologically mediated faith. Radical movements also emerged. Groups of religious Luddites staged actions to destroy the digital infrastructure of the church, hacking into the servers of religious organizations, deleting databases, and physically disabling equipment. They saw themselves as defenders of true spirituality from technological desecration. The authorities classified them as terrorists, but sympathy for their goals, if not their methods, grew in society. The Vatican found itself at the center of a global crisis that it had provoked itself. The attempt to modernize the church through technology turned into a disaster for the trust and legitimacy of the institution. Millions of Catholics left the church, unwilling to be the subjects of a digital experiment. Millions more remained, but demanded radical reforms and transparency. The church split into factions: techno-optimists, who believed that modernization should continue, and traditionalists, who demanded a return to pre-technological forms of faith. The question was no longer whether religion could survive in the digital age, but whether it should survive in a form that required such a radical compromise with its own values. Is it possible to preserve the essence of religion, a person's personal relationship with the transcendent, in a world of total digital mediation? Or was humanity on the threshold of an era when true spirituality was possible only in resistance to technology, not in alliance with it? The international community's reaction to the disclosure of the Vatican project was swift and multifaceted. The United Nations convened an emergency session of the Human Rights Council to discuss the threat to religious freedom. The UN Secretary-General issued a statement calling the use of AI to manipulate religious beliefs one of the most alarming challenges of the digital age. A special commission was set up to investigate the extent of the problem, not only in the Vatican, but also in other religious organizations around the world. The European Court of Human Rights accepted a class action lawsuit from a group of former Catholics who claimed that their right to privacy and freedom of thought had been violated by the Vatican's use of technology. The plaintiffs sought compensation and a ban on the further use of such systems in the member states of the Council of Europe. The court scheduled public hearings which were broadcast worldwide and attracted unprecedented attention. In the United States, Congress held a series of hearings to which top executives of technology companies that had collaborated with the Vatican were summoned. Executives from Google, Microsoft, and Amazon testified under oath. Many of them denied knowledge of the full scope of the project, claiming that they only provided standard commercial services. But internal correspondence published by whistleblowers contradicted these statements, showing that the corporations were well aware of how their technologies were being used. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission launched an investigation into the technology companies for possible violations of consumer protection laws. At the same time, the Department of Justice investigated whether the Vatican had violated U.S. laws by collecting data on U.S. citizens without their explicit consent. A precedent-setting question arose: can a foreign state, such as the Vatican, be held liable for digital interference in the rights of Americans? A wave of critical rethinking of the relationship between technology and religion swept through the academic world. Leading universities organized conferences on the ethics of religious AI. Hundreds of research papers were published, analyzing the Vatican case from various disciplinary perspectives. New research centers specializing in the intersection of artificial intelligence, religion, and human rights were created. UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief, Ahmed Shahid, presented a detailed report on the situation. He concluded that the Vatican project constitutes a systematic violation of Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and called on UN member states to adopt legislation criminalizing the use of technology for covert manipulation of religious beliefs. The report also recommended the creation of an international registry of religious AI systems with mandatory certification. The Vatican's own response evolved under pressure. Initial outright denial gave way to partial acknowledgement of individual excesses. Pope Francis issued a statement expressing deep concern about the facts that had come to light and promised a thorough investigation. A Pontifical Council for Digital Ethics was created, comprising both church hierarchs and independent experts. However, many perceived these steps as an attempt to limit the damage rather than genuine reform. Activists demanded more: the complete termination of the project, the destruction of the collected data, a public apology to all affected believers, and punishment for those responsible. When it became clear that the Vatican was not ready for such radical measures, the wave of protests intensified. Mass demonstrations took place in Rome, Madrid, Warsaw, and Manila, the world's largest Catholic cities. Some countries took unilateral action. Germany announced a ban on any AI systems used for religious profiling of citizens. France passed a law requiring religious organizations to obtain explicit opt-in consent from believers for any collection and processing of their data. Canada introduced a moratorium on the use of facial recognition technology in places of worship. These measures set precedents for global regulation. International human rights organizations, such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, released a joint report, Faith Under Surveillance. The document cataloged in detail the human rights violations associated with the Vatican project and made recommendations to prevent similar situations in the future. The report was widely circulated and used as the basis for advocacy campaigns around the world. Unexpected alliances emerged. Atheist organizations, Catholic reformers, libertarian activists, and Islamic human rights defenders found common ground in their opposition to digital religious control. A new coalition was formed, united not by a common faith, but by a common value: the right of every person to freedom of their inner world from technological intrusion, regardless of whether that world is religious or not. The artificial intelligence expert community also got involved. More than 2,000 AI researchers and developers signed an open letter condemning the use of machine learning technologies to manipulate religious beliefs. The letter called for the establishment of ethical red lines in the development of AI that cannot be crossed even if technically possible. The Vatican project has become a symbol of what can go wrong when powerful technologies are applied without proper ethical control. But despite international condemnation, the question remained: what to do next? The technology already existed, and knowledge could not be unlearned. Even if the Vatican shut down its project, nothing prevented other organizations from repeating it. Something more than laws and resolutions was needed: a fundamental rethinking of the place technology should occupy in the spiritual life of humanity. And the time for this rethinking was rapidly running out. The future of religion in the age of artificial intelligence remains an open question. But the Vatican case set the parameters for debate for decades to come. Humanity found itself at a crossroads. Either religion would adapt to digital reality while preserving its ethical essence, or technology would engulf spirituality, turning it into yet another sphere of optimization and control. A third path, a conscious rejection of the technologization of faith, also had its supporters, but seemed increasingly unrealistic in a hyper-connected world. optimists pointed to the potential of technology for genuine spiritual development. AI could help in the study of sacred texts by providing instant access to millennia-old commentaries. Virtual reality allowed people who were physically unable to travel to make pilgrimages to holy sites. Meditation apps helped millions master ancient mindfulness practices. Technology was neutral. It all depended on how it was used. But the scandal showed how fragile this neutrality was. Tools created for one purpose were easily repurposed for manipulation. The line between helping faith and controlling faith turned out to be blurred. Clear principles were needed to define where this line was drawn. And who would establish these principles? Religious institutions, states, technology companies, civil society remained a subject of heated debate. Some thinkers proposed a radical solution: a complete separation of technology and faith. Religious organizations should voluntarily refrain from using AI, big data, and algorithmic personalization. Faith should remain a space that is human, analog, and unpredictable. Churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples would become technology-free zones, refuges from the digital world. Only in this way could the authenticity of the spiritual experience be preserved. Opponents of this position pointed to its utopian nature. Digital and physical spaces are now inseparable. Even if religious institutions reject technology, believers will use it on their own. Moreover, a complete rejection of digital tools will condemn traditional religions to marginalization. Younger generations who have grown up in a digital environment will simply not attend analog churches. The choice was not between technology and its absence, but between its ethical and unethical use. New models of open faith emerged. Religious movements that were built on the principles of transparency and consent from the outset. These communities used technology, but with full disclosure of how data was collected and used. Believers had access to their profiles, could see what algorithms were being used, and made an informed decision about participation. Ethical registries of religious AI systems were created, where anyone could check whether their community met the standards of digital integrity. Technological solutions also evolved towards protecting autonomy. AI systems were developed that helped believers in their spiritual growth, but consciously avoided manipulative techniques. Such systems did not attempt to change a person's beliefs, but only provided information and tools for their own search. This was the AI assistant model, as opposed to the AI controller model. Technology as an enhancement of human agency, not its suppression. The international community was moving towards the creation of a Geneva Convention on Digital Religious Rights. This treaty was supposed to establish basic standards for the use of technology in the religious sphere. A ban on covert manipulation, the requirement for informed consent, the right to access one's own data, the right to be forgotten, and the protection of religious minorities from digital discrimination. The negotiations were difficult, but progress was evident. After a year of crisis, the Vatican embarked on a path of reform. The new Pope, elected after Francis's resignation, made transparency and ethics his priorities. The Digital Shepherd project was officially closed, and all collected data was deleted under international supervision. A new model of the Church's digital presence was created, based on openness and respect for the autonomy of believers. Archbishop Ritchie was stripped of all his posts and retired to a monastery for penance. But the scars remained. Trust in the Church was undermined among an entire generation. Many Catholics converted to more decentralized forms of Christianity, or left organized religion altogether. A movement of house churches emerged, small communities that gathered in private homes, avoiding institutional structures and any data collection technologies. For them, true faith could only exist on a small scale, where everyone knew each other personally. At the same time, digital religions developed, new forms of spirituality born in the heart of the technological world. These movements were not afraid of AI, but integrated it into their practices, considering the boundary between the biological and the digital to be obsolete. For them, interacting with algorithms was a form of meditation, and the collective consciousness of believers, mediated by technology, was a new form of church. Traditional religions viewed them with suspicion, but young people found answers to their questions in these movements. Philosophers spoke of the advent of a post-manipulative era, a time when society had learned to recognize and resist digital control. The Vatican scandal was a painful but necessary vaccination to build immunity. Education was changing. Schools began teaching digital hygiene and critical thinking as it applied to religious content. New generations grew up more aware of how technology affects their beliefs. But there were also pessimists. They pointed out that technology was developing faster than regulation and public awareness. While society was learning to resist one generation of manipulative technologies, new, more sophisticated ones were already emerging. Neurointerfaces, quantum computing, next-level generative AI. Each technological leap opened up new possibilities for mind control. It was an endless race in which defense always lagged behind offense. Some religious thinkers suggested rethinking the very nature of faith in the technological age. Perhaps true faith is now defined not by the content of one's beliefs, but by the ability to maintain a critical distance from any influence, be it a priest's sermon or an algorithm's recommendation. Faith as a practice of freedom, a constant exercise in choosing what to accept and what to reject. Not blind obedience, but a conscious decision in every moment. 5 years after the Vatican project was exposed, the world has changed. Attitudes toward technology in the religious sphere have become much more cautious. Independent certification institutions for religious applications and systems have appeared. Believers learn to ask questions about how their communities use data. Churches competed not only with their sermons, but also with the ethics of their digital practices. The story is not over yet. Technology continued to evolve. Religious institutions continued to seek a balance between tradition and modernity. Believers continued to seek authenticity in a world of simulations. But the Vatican case changed the discourse forever. It was now impossible to naively believe in the neutrality of technology. Every tool had the potential for both liberation and enslavement. And the choice of what the future of religion would be depended on millions of individual decisions made every day by every believer. Perhaps the most important lesson was the realization that faith cannot be delegated. Not to a priest, not to an institution, and certainly not to an algorithm. True spirituality requires personal responsibility, critical thinking, a willingness to doubt, and asking uncomfortable questions. In an era when technology can construct any experience, only faith that has withstood the test of doubt can be considered true. And in this, paradoxically, ancient wisdom met the challenges of the digital future.